Well, good morning everyone and welcome to the show. Fernando.
Welcome to the show.
Today we have an F-150. Wait. Don't go away. One of the things we're going to talk about in this F-150 is kind of universal, meaning that there's more and more cars that are running into problems like this one is going to have. Today we're going to talk about that specific solution. What I mean is this has a factory premium audio system, Bang & Olufsen. It's a 2019. It has a factory amplifier with factory subwoofer, and we need to integrate into it because we're putting a full system in this. This is becoming more and more common. But before we get into that, let's roll the intro. I'll catch you on the other side. More and more cars are coming with premium audio systems. We need to be able to integrate into those. There's a bunch of manufacturers that are making interfaces for them, these right here. And because of that, it's become one of those things where you really got to pay attention to what you're doing. You're going to have to do some homework. Sure, you could probably just integrate in using high level to low level if you're doing a really basic system. You are going to run into some audio problems, meaning that things are going to sound maybe weird because you're pulling out those factory speakers. Being able to get a preamp output out of a factory radio is ideal because we don't have to fix any of the factory nonsense. However, there's a lot of things going on from the factory, and what is it? How come we can't just grab into it? We're going to talk about that today, and we're going to talk about finding the solutions, and we're going to just go on a journey about putting the amplifiers in this particular F-150 and how it's done and how we do it. So where to start? Let's fold down the seat and talk about the amplifier. Depending on when you bought your Ford product, it's either going to have a Sony system in it, or it's going to have a BO system in it, or it's going to have nothing in it. And each one of those is going to be a little bit different how you're going to interface with it. The first one, the older one, was a Sony, and it had an amp that looked very similar to this, and there's a couple different interfaces out there for it now. PAC makes one, Data makes one, Metro makes one, but then every few years the manufacturer changes. And in this case, Ford was right on top of it, and they changed it. They came out with the BO system, or Bang & Olufsen, and they changed the whole bus system on how you did it. This uses what's called A2B, and how you can tell the difference between the two is actually pretty simple. See this blue cable right here? What looks like a USB. And this is the bus that talks to the amplifier. So we need something that's going to be able to read that and give us a signal output. Now you say, why don't we just go after the amplifier? Well, it's an EQ'd signal on the output of the amplifier. There's a lot of things going on. In this case, you have tweeters. They come out of the radio, all right? You have the two mids in the front door, they come out of this amp. The rear doors, they come out of the amp. The subwoofer, dual voice coil, out of the amp. Center channel, out of the amp in the center. It's weird, right? Why would you use power in a deck? Well, the reason why is because there was already power there, and to save money, you might as well use it, right? And that brings us to the next thing. Well, what if it has a factory radio non-amplified? Well, thanks to the guys at iData, they've actually made an interface for that to reprogram the radio to give us a non-EQ'd 4-volt output. That non-EQ'd is kind of the rub there. We have a video that we've done it on. I'll, of course, put it in the show notes where you can go and see that one. And the reason why the non-EQ'd is important is you're going to have to de-EQ it if not. And if it's non-EQ'd, meaning it's perfectly flat, then it's just going to make it easier for you to add amplifiers to it. With this BO system, we now need to find an interface for it. Now, of course, I showed you all those places that we go to check. Let's head over to the laptop and see who makes the interface for this and which one we're going to go to. Now, naturally, we have our favorites, and we're going to check those first. And when it comes to coming out with interfaces for audio first, it's a company called A2B. They specialize with integrating into factory systems, such as backup cameras, aux jacks, anything that revolves around keeping that factory radio on the dash. They make stuff that goes into it. They've also expanded into the Zen line of products, which takes us into adding amplifiers in cars. They were the first to develop the A2B, selecting the make, the Ford, model, F-150, year, 2019, US version, select solution. We'll narrow it down to audio interfaces, and what pops up is Zen A2B. This is the interface solution for this car. One thing to note about the Zen A2B is they don't always think interfacing through all the way. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If you look here closely in the picture, you notice these two harnesses here. These are what's going to plug into those factory harnesses we just saw. But what you're not going to see is speaker wire hanging off of them. For some reason, they haven't put that together, that there should be speaker wires there to retain the factory speaker wires. The nice thing is, we should be able to cut the shrink wrap off and solder on our own. At least that's what we've done in the past. The reason why we're willing to go a little bit extra on this particular piece is because they use all top-of-the-line parts when making their Zen products. These things sound really good. They have Toshlink outputs if you want to go into a higher-end DSP, along with they have multiple channels of output. Now this is the one we're going to use, so once we get over to the bench, we'll really dive deep into it. But let's keep going on here. There's new products coming out all the time, so it always is a benefit to go and check to see if there's any new products that come out since the last time you did one of these. And to do that, we'll go and check iData, Ford year 2019, select model, F150, and as we checked right here, it says without amplifier. So right now the only option is without amplifier, which is what we were talking about when we were in the car. Next we want to check metroonline.com, make, model, year. Go down here where it says digital signal processor, and it doesn't open, which means that they don't have one. It means we're still working on gathering information on this vehicle. Please check back soon. It means no. Lastly, go to pack-audio.com, type in the make, model, and year, scroll down. Well, they have dash kits, they have steering wheel control interfaces, speaker connection harness for the 2018-19 Ford vehicles with the Bang & Olufsen do make a T harness, the APH FD02. This might actually be kind of cool. We might be able to use this with our nav TV piece if we don't feel like soldering all those wires onto the harness. So this harness was made for their dash kit that they make for this car. And that's one of the things that we talk about on the show a lot, that trying to find a specific harness is sometimes not the easiest thing to do. That doesn't mean the harness doesn't exist. It just means that it may exist, but in a totally another application. However, it may be helpful for us just because it's a complete harness that we can use. We'll see if we have it in stock. We've checked all the sources. We still have one manufacturer making an adapter for this, but these are the steps you have to go through. Let's take a look at that A to B piece and kind of go over it. Let's open it up and see what comes in the box. Nav TV, Zen Audio, DSP 12A-A2B kit. Instructions, A to B brain, and the harness. Something to note about these are made here in the US. All these harnesses are hand built. These are your RC output ends. If you notice, there's way more than just your standard 6. In fact, there are 12 outputs. We open this up inside. It gives us our list of all 12. You have right front, left front, 1 through 6, right rear door, left rear door, which is 7 through 10, 11 is center, and 12 is subwoofer. The reasoning behind that is there is a DSP chip in here, and at some point they were talking about making it available as a downloadable purchase so that you could just have your DSP all built into it and ready to go. On the first end, you have all your outputs, your digital output as well as your RCA. On the other end, USB A to B input, that blue harness is going to plug into here, a power light, a status power light, which is going to tell you what's happening with the unit, the programmer USB, and then the main power harness here. Looking at the main power harness, there's not much to it. You have a remote output, the power and ground connector is located here, and this purple and white are going to be your data connection. That's all there is to it. As you notice, they're all pinned here, and if you look inside of this, they're all pinned here. So we can solder on our wires onto this and make our own harness and then put shrink wrap back over it. I haven't decided if I want to do that yet. Looking over the instructions, they go over what we just talked about. They tell you the models that it'll work for. They explain to you how this is to be installed by removing the factory amplifier. The factory amplifier is coming out of this installation. We get to use all that room. They tell you the pin outs on their harness here. This. I suggest checking them to make sure that they are correct. According to this, pin 1, which is this far corner here, is the ground. That is in the right place. Above it, pin 6 is a constant 12 volts, which is this red wire. Next to ground and pin 2 is the remote turn on. If you get one of these and you go to put it in and your remote turn on isn't working and you didn't check this, that may be why. Pin 5 is supposed to be violet white, and it is. That's going to be your can high, can low. Pin 10 right above it is your violet. We have a good harness harness. It also goes back over what all 12 of those RCAs do. Tuning tips. Before beginning using the process, especially with an external DSP, set bass and treble on the head unit to 0, which we'll hop in and check to make sure those are off. Begin with the amplifier gain set all the way down. So they go over and give you a basic startup. The status LED, this guy right here. Solid red, A to B active only, no CAN present. Solid green, CAN active, no A to B. Green and red or yellow. A to B plus CAN active, normal operations. Blue, violet, white, receiving amplifier commands. Blinking red, clipping, blinking blue, connected to your PC updater. These two guys here are the breakouts for the factory side, these pins. This is going to tell us our center channel, positive, negative, subwoofer, right, and it also gives us a wire color. We don't have to do any checkings of polarities and all that. Do give you the information here to solder in your own wires if you choose. They also give you an image of what the factory amplifier should look like. That way you know it's the A to B system. They talk about the blue plug. They also show you what it looks like if you're going to be using your RCAs or if you're just going to be using the Toshlink out. Then there is some software that you can run on this to do certain changes in the unit. It gives you what comes default and what does not. If there's things you want to change, the next couple pages are going to go through and tell you all about those. And then they give you an overview of the hardware itself. 12 channels. Output voltage peak is 6 volts. Output voltage normal is 2.1 volts. Signal to noise ratio is 114. Frequency response is 18 to 24,000. The DAC it's using is a 48 kilohertz 32-bit DAC. The DSP is a 32-bit floating point DSP. I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, you said you'd have to turn the DSP function on. It needs DSP for just the general operation, and why it needs that is because your car is going to have backup sensors, lane departure warnings, and all these other things that need to make sure they go to the right place in the car. The DSP that's built into this is designed to do that. Without it, things wouldn't be where they need to be. It's not just for doing tuning and time alignment and all that. Current consumption on standby is less than a milliamp, which is important because you don't want this drawing a bunch of current when the car is off and draining your battery. Now, since we're talking about current draw, when integrating into a factory radio, factory system, the remote turn on doesn't work like aftermarket. Aftermarket, you turn off the radio, the remote turn on shuts off, the amplifier shut off. Factory, not so much. When you turn the car off, that doesn't turn off the remote turn on. It just tells the system that the radio is going to start the power down process now. If the doors all close and everything shuts off, it'll go, okay, I'll start the power down process. It can take up to 3 minutes for these things to go to sleep. On the flip side, if you hit unlock, it starts the power up sequence. If you were to walk away from the car, you come back, you open your door, and you look at your amp, you're like, hey, my amps are on. Yes, they're on, but it's because you woke them up. It will go into standby sleep mode. Just take some time for it to do that, as well as it'll wake up immediately. For this system, there will be no need for us to remove the factory radio. That's kind of cool, right? We're upgrading the system without removing the factory radio. A lot of times when you do these amplifier integration upgrades, you don't have to remove the factory radio. Some you do, some you don't. It just depends what you're doing and how the data gets from one point to the other. So pay attention to that. Don't start taking the car apart until you find out where your interface harness has to go. For example, a lot of the times the pack interfaces go behind the radio because you're retaining the factory amplifier. iData typically goes at the amplifier. Zen, there again, depends. Sometimes you have to retain the factory amplifier, such as a GM, and other times you don't, such as a Ford. Read the instructions to find out what actually needs to come apart. In this case, because the tweeter wires are located behind the radio and we're going to be replacing them with new ones, it's a little bit easier just for us to run new tweeter wires back instead of having to cut into the factory harness. Because we're not tying in there, that means there is no harness going behind the radio for us to grab the wires from. In the Ford Explorers, it works the same way, just in case you were wondering. So we have all the information that we need right now to get started on this. We know this amplifier needs to come out. We got to get rid of this factory subwoofer. We need this room here to mount our amplifiers. Tip, when doing one of these Bang & Olufsen systems, unlike the non-premium version, this thing on the seat right here, about this inch by 4 inch thing, it does fold in and takes up room. Try to move the amplifiers as far that way as possible so that this doesn't hit into them. To get this amplifier out, we're gonna need a Torx and a 10mm. We can also unplug it now. The Torx is for the 2 top screws here, 10mm for down on the bottom. You may also need a 12 too. The harness for the BO also connects into this harness here. This one is totally separate. It clips into the seat. You're gonna wanna remove this clip. We need to do some prettying up of these wires. We're gonna remove this whole side panel here, along with this floorboard. We have wires to run, but we need to get these specific things off because we need to get to these wires. We need to clean up this harness a little bit to do better wire management. Ford just uses the standard fuzzy Tessa tape for their wiring. We have some, we'll do the same. Pro tip, when cutting this stuff, have a fresh, sharp blade. This tape can act like the softest butter to cut or hard as a rock. It's really weird. When taping it back up, break it into its dedicated pieces. One of the reasons why we wanted to do this is we need to get this blue wire apart and out so that we can plug it in to a little bit farther away than they give you access to from the factory. The first one to start with is that one that was attached to the seat. We want that one all by its lonesome. Untangle these as much as you can. They don't do a really good job at that. The harnesses just kind of all like group in and run through each other, which could be expected when you have, 100 wires. When taping up the speaker plug, don't go all the way to the end. Leave about 1.25 inches so that you can see what color is what on here. So when you're soldering in, you know where they're at and you're soldering into the right ones. Our wires are now separated into their own groups. This is the one that has to plug into. These two have plugs that have length to them. We wanted to make sure we got this one as far out of the bundle as possible. Also, the one here that plugs into the seat is all taped up on its own. The zip tie went back in, so it's all clipped in. If you're a paranoid person like myself and don't like surprises at the end, I like to know right up front what I'm walking into. We can plug the Zen A2B into this right now and we will have a fully functioning preamp output. We can test everything. We can make sure that all the channels are doing what they're supposed to do. We have some form of RTA that will read electrical signal, which we do. Plug it in and see what that looks like. For the install we're doing in this car, we're going with an external DSP that has 4 channels of input, front and rear. It creates a 6th channel subwoofer output. And seeing how this has so many outputs, I'm going to put some shrink wrap over the RCAs that we're going to be using for this. One is left front, which in our world is white. 2, which will be gray. Rear is 7 and 8. 8 I've found, which is right rear door. That's purple. 7 is going to be green. Now, in case you're wondering what these colors are, these are the standard wire colors for these corners of the car. If you've ever put in a radio before, they use these standard colors. If you've ever seen a factory wiring harness adapter, they use these standard colors. And it just makes it easy. We can look at these quickly in a glance. Let's get over in the car and plug this in. Plug in the USB blue connector first, the big gray speaker harness, the smaller black main power harness. As soon as you do that, you'll start to see blue and red lights flashing away, which is what we want to see. That's good. It means it's communicating, it's reading the system, and then it goes orange. And that orange is actually more of a yellow. According to the instructions, that's that green red or yellow, which means normal operations. I'm gonna turn the key on, turn the radio up. We'll have no sound, but it'll put voltage into the RCAs, which is what we're looking for. Playing pink noise in the system, we see that nice flat output. That is exactly what we want to see. This is what's coming out of the driver's front speaker. We check the volume control by having Fernando turn it up and down. It goes down, it goes back up. We also want to check to make sure that the blinky light is working here. As you can see, it changes colors. That means it's properly receiving the signal. I'm going to switch over to a rear RCA and the passenger rear door is working. That's telling us our signal is working exactly how we want it to. We have front, we have rear, it's going where it needs to. It's ruler flat, perfect for tuning. We don't have to fight any of those signals coming out of the amplifier. And that nice flat line, this one right here, You want to have the best signal possible going into your amplifiers or your DSP, and this will give it to you. Think of it like this, and this is what I always tell people. You're gonna have to buy some form of a radio. Everyone automatically assumes just because they have a radio in their dash that part of the expense is out of the equation. It's not. You're still gonna have to do it, just you're gonna have to do it with interfacing. This interface costs about as much as an aftermarket radio. But what it's doing is it's turning your factory, gorgeous looking, this whole yay, whether it be a Ford or something else, into an aftermarket radio. The whole reason why you go with an aftermarket radio is so you could get that nice ruler flat output in the preamp section, that awesome preamp section. We've just done that now in our factory radio. It's kind of like the holy grail of what we've been wanting to do for years and years and years now. This and boxes just like that now does it for us. It's super exciting. Get excited, people. The last thing we want to test is the remote turn on. We want to make sure that that works and it has 12 volts of output. Like we said, this automatically wakes up as soon as you do things in the car. So what that means is we don't necessarily need to turn the car on and see if it's putting out the voltage. Blue wire goes to red, black wire goes to ground. This is what we want to see. This is what's going to turn on our amplifiers. Now the fun part starts. We've done all the testing. We've seen how it works. It's going to be no surprises, what I like. It's time to figure out that harness and where all those wires are going to go. But before we do that, I am going to check to see if I have the pack harness. And if I don't, well then we'll solder all those things on. Pack Audio APH FD02. We have it in stock. It's the same harness. It lines up. It has a female and male end. If we wanted to, we could plug this in like this, plug this into the factory and be done with it. However, these are the data wires right here. We could actually remove this whole harness altogether and just solder this one into place. Probably what I'm gonna do. But before we do any of that, I'm gonna take this into the car, plug it in, and tone all these speakers to make sure that there's speakers on the other end of these wires. Starting with our green pair. Yes, there's a gray pair. It's 2 for 2. Drivers. Passenger rear. So the purple, the green, the gray, and the white go exactly where we need them to go. There's also 3 other ones here, a red, a blue, and a brown. The brown should be center, which isn't in the car, so it's not gonna make any noise. The red is subwoofer 2, and the blue is subwoofer 1, which all 3 of these speakers are not in the car. We don't need them. We're not going to be retaining them. Yes, this harness will work for what we want to do. Removing the female end that would plug into this, plug it into place. There's a pink and a pink black. The pink is going to this white wire and the pink black is going to the purple wire. I'm going to solder those on. But before I do that, the extra wires, the blue, brown, and red, we're not going to be using, and I want to remove those off of the harness. There we go. The shrink wrap off, these are the pins I was talking about. So if you're good at soldering, you could definitely solder on. The last thing I'm doing to this harness, now that we've got it all straightened out, is adding a layer of tape, just like the factory. Our Zen is prepped. We have our speaker wires, remote turn on, RCAs. This is ready to get into the car. Next step is getting this connected to the amplifiers. For this install, we're going to be using the AudioControl D4800 DSP 4-channel amplifier with an output to go to the LC 1.800 amplifier. That's why we're only using 4-channel output on the Zen A2B. They're going to feed into here, and then there's an output that comes over to this. But instead of talking about it, let's unbox these and we'll take a look at it. Let's start with the D4800. You'll find the check-in sheet, the owner's manual, the amplifier itself, the cable to program it, and an Allen key. The Allen key is to get the top off of the amplifier, which I like to do right away and put back in the box before I move forward. There's 2 screws located here at the front. Loosen those all the way up. Give it a little pop towards the bottom, and it'll come right off. The D4800. This amplifier is one of the most universal amplifiers on the market today. Let me explain why. First off, it has 80 amps of current draw. It has a 4-gauge input for both power and ground, remote turn on. Remote turn on, though, can be done multiple ways. 12-volt turn on from something like the Zen A2B. If you look on the top of the amplifier, you have a switch here that says GTO signal sense on and off. This allows you to use the inputs here to turn on the amplifier via DC offset. We're not going to be using using that, so we want to make sure that our switch is in the off position. RCA inputs front, RCA inputs rear, and then line out. This is the output that goes off to the sub-amplifier, which is programmable through the software on the amplifier. To use the software, the blue cable provided plugs into this USB input right here. Next to it, you'll see the option port. This can be used for a couple different things. The Bluetooth dongle or the future iData interface for it. That way this can plug directly into an AR, plug directly into any iData installation, and do similar things that this Zen is doing. These three connectors here, that's right, three connectors here, are your high-level input. Why would there be three? You have front, you have rear, but then you have front high input. The reason for this is depending on the installation, you may have a car with an amplifier like this one that there's no form of integration on it whatsoever. It's got a tweeter output, it's got a front mid-range output, and it has a rear. This allows you to use this amplifier's internal high-level to low-level adapter with 6 channels of input, and you can sum the front high inputs with the front inputs in the software. Think of it as their LC7i built into a 4-channel amplifier. One of very few amplifiers that have internal summing capability built into it. To control the level of the front high input, it is done through the software. The other nice thing is if you bought just the LC and not the D version, it has those same high-level features also. There would be a gain control here that allows you to do your summing mix on the top along with your other gain controls. Located over here next to the USB is your ACR3 volume control. The ACR3 is going to control this output here if you would like, and also allow you to toggle through the presets. Those presets can also be controlled here if you buy the Bluetooth dongle. It has your stereo outputs for 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 located here. It'll do down to 2 ohm stereo and 4 ohm mono. We're going to be using 4 ohm stereo. Some of the specifications on the amplifier: 125 watts by 4 at 4 ohms. If you decide to run it at 2 ohms times 4, you will go up to 200 watts. If you'd like to bridge it into a 2-channel or 3-channel mode, you can get 400 watts at 4 ohms out of the combined channels. Input wise, if you're going to be using it as low level, they'll take 500 millivolts all the way up to 6 volts. For high level input, you have 3 volts to 40 volts. Frequency response on the amplifier is 10 Hz to 24,000. Total harmonic distortion is less than 0.01%. For a full list of all the specifications on the amplifier, make sure to head over to AudioControl.com where you can check them all out there. Next, let's take a look at the sub-amp, the LC 1800. Owner's manual, Allen key. Just like the highs amp, take off the cover. The LC 1800 is a spectacular sub-amplifier. A couple features on the top to note: it has the GTO signal sense input, make sure it's off. It has AccuBass. All of the audio control amplifiers are designed to go in multiple ways, via RCA inputs or line level inputs. If you're putting this into a system with a factory radio, it may have a feature called bass roll off. Bass roll off is where, as you're turning it up, you'll notice the subwoofer doesn't get any louder, but your mids and highs continue to. With AccuBass, it's a feature put into the amplifier to help alleviate that. It also will work as a bass boost too, depending on your needs. Your crossover, low pass, between 30 and 230 Hertz. Your gain control, 180 degrees phase switch. It has what they call the MILC source clip input light, as well as your gain maximized. When these things start flickering, that's telling you you gotta start turning things down. If your source light comes on, that's telling you that your source unit is starting to distort, turn it down. If your gain maximized light starts coming on, that's telling your gain is up too high. The D4800 has those also. Maximized input as well as maximized output. Your source level clip light is located here. On the end of the amplifier, you have your 80 amps of fusing, 4-gauge input for both power and ground, remote turn on, your high level input, your line level input, has up to an 8-gauge output for your subwoofer. It is a positive and negative output that will play down to 2 ohms, as indicated right here. And it has an input for the ACR1 remote level controller. Some specifications on the amplifier: it's 500 watts at 4 ohms, 800 watts at 2 ohms. It has the same maximum input voltage on the low level at 500 millivolts up to 6 volts, and 3 to 40 volts of input on the high level. Total harmonic distortion is less than 0.01%. When I'm using both of these amplifiers in this configuration, I like to call it my 5-channel amplifier. I come out of this RCA here and come into this RCA here. I don't like to use the ACR3 subwoofer volume control. I like the ACR1. It's just a straight volume knob. It has a stopping point and it has has a starting point. It's not an infinite spin. The ACR3 spins and spins and spins, but that's my personal preference. It's up to you to decide which ones you like. This is our amp board. It's very similar to the shape of what is in the car. We actually use the shape of the car to generate this. This would be where that factory subwoofer goes, and this is that amplifier mount. As we said, we need to keep these things low and over so that that bracket that's on the seat does not get in the way of our amplifiers. The first step is figuring out where we're going to mount these amplifiers. I've already gone into the car and measured how far over I need to come in order to clear that box. This is super thin, so this can go here, no issues. It's not going to hit that. But these have to go this way some. I also have 2 distribution blocks that are going to have to go here for my 0 gauge that I'm running. And I have these 2 passive crossovers for the Morel speakers we're putting in. My plan so far is to mount these somewhere like this. There's 2 wires I have to run up front as far as speaker goes. I have 2 tweeter wires, so there's not a lot going on there, and they're going to go up the passenger side of the car. I have a bass knob, which is going to come up the driver's side of the car, and I have the 2 0 gauge. That's it. So I don't need a bunch of room across the bottom of the amplifier here for the RCAs and speaker wire. And if I was doing the non-premium sound, I'd be able to move these over more so that I could arrange these better to have that room. With that all in mind, this is my initial thought process as far as where I think these need to go. I need them up high enough to where I can get all the stuff happening here. I need them down low enough so that the seat will still close, and I need them over far enough for that same reason. This is my best guess. I'm going to clear this stuff off, get it into the car, test the seat to make sure it opens and closes without rubbing on the amplifiers. When you're putting screws in ABS, make sure you pre-drill all the holes that you're going to do. Don't just try to screw into it. With the seat in the up position, put a flashlight back there, and we're just looking at this gap here. Looking at the space there with that green plug where the amplifier sits. Make sure that you do fold the whole seat down and that you don't have any issues there. And fold it back up. Make sure you hear no clanks. Put your hand behind there. Make sure that it is not touching. This part of the seat right here is where the concern is because it is a metal. There's a bar here. This is a great position for it. It's not touching anywhere. We'll proceed to the next step, which is getting the amplifiers all wired up and ready for sound. This is going to be our layout. It fits. Everything is where we need it. First part of this install I want to concentrate on is the Zen. One thing that I've done off camera is flip the circuit board inside of the unit. If you'll notice, it says Zen here and the image is right. Typically it's wrong. In the past I've cut covers for it and whatnot, and then someone pointed out you can easily slide the board in and out. I was like, that's a good idea. And since we weren't too into the install, it was easy enough to pull the 4 screws out of each end, flip it around. It just means that these techs don't pertain to the ends now. But if you're one of the guys that wants it to where it's the right orientation, something you might think about. The reason for that is that the blue USB has to plug in down here on the bottom because the cable isn't long enough to come up here and plug into the top. There's also no reason to put a bunch of zip ties on here and like put it in after the fact. You need to be able to unplug this and take it out if necessary. With that in mind, I'm going to drill a hole here so that it can come in from behind, loop through, and plug in and not just be this blue wire hanging out. Make sure you make the hole big enough, test fit it if you need to. You don't want to get it into the car and then realize that you made it just a little too small. Grabbing our speaker and power harness, plug that in. The remote turn on wire is going to run across just like this. These have plenty to plug in. The speaker wire is also going to do the same thing across just this area here, and then this will run off into the corner. The RCAs plug into the top. For those, I'm going to drill a hole and do the same thing. We just have to wait and see how long the cables are. Let's just get started assembling this thing together and running our wires. We're all done. Power is run across the bottom here. Ground is right above that. Our speaker wires coming from the factory plug are located right here. They come across in tight next to the amplifier and head over into the crossovers. These are the two tweeter wires that are going to run forward for us. The RCAs tuck up into the amplifier and then go up into the Zen. Our USB will come up through this hole here and plug in. This hole here is for our bass knob. And that's about it as far as this goes. This now can go into the car. Once in the car, plug in all our harnesses, and then we'll come in and we'll look at everything and how it plays out. Amp board is mounted using the two factory screws provided here and here. Zen is connected. All the connections are done behind this panel. Make sure when you go to put it back in, you put that connector in right, just like we showed you. Put it in the reverse direction. You don't want it to not go in right. The one thing with flipping it upside down is that those lights that we were seeing earlier are on the bottom. If you do need to see it though, nice little mirror on the bottom there will allow you to see what's going on. We've already tested it though, so we really shouldn't have anything to worry about. Make the rest of the connections you need to make in the car, such as the tweeters, power and ground. Always save those for last. Then we can turn it on and take a listen to it. With everything in, turn the car on, turn your volume up 1. Check and see if you have audio. We have audio. Turn it back down. If you're doing any form of DSP processor or anything like that, at this point you know you have audio, turn it back down, plug it into the laptop, do any software updates, anything like that, because what we want to do is get the crossovers set up first. DSP is plugged in, laptop, password, firmware available, yes. Here's one of the secrets to doing the firmware. Start the car. If you've never done it before and don't know how long it's gonna take, if you have a car that takes a key and you know if the car stays on for a certain amount of time, it automatically shuts off. The same true for a push button. Start the car, let it run. If your amplifier shuts off while it's doing a software update, it can lock up the whole amplifier. Might not necessarily hose it, but you may have to, just like a computer, might have to call tech support and see if there is any form of on-site reload of the software. Fortunately for your audio control, you can. Ask me how I know. The other thing you can do too is you can take a jumper from the constant 12 volts over to the remote turn on, and that will make sure that that amplifier stays on as long as there's 12 volts going into it. You can also do it while it's sitting on the bench if you have an external power supply. Just be careful when you're doing it. Make sure that the car doesn't go to sleep. When it's all done, it will reboot. Every DSP is gonna have an input setup, front, rear, front high is what the D4.800 has. This right here is our volume control. It comes default to 12. We're gonna just set it to 0 for right now. Move to rear, we'll do the same thing. It comes default to 12 because of the testing they do from the factory. Front high. When we were talking about this earlier, this is that input for those tweeters if we needed to use the high level input. This is the control we'd use to do our summing right here. When we look at the output view, front, we'll enable front, we have our choices for summing. If we pick this, now both the front and the front high are going into channels 1 and 2. If while listening to it, we decide that either the front needs to go up because we have room to turn up the gain, or the high needs to go down because it is getting to be too intense, we come back to our input views, we can select high and we can volume down some or volume up some. If we wanted to, of course, we could bring them both up if there's room before distortion. This is extremely helpful if you're doing a system that doesn't have some form of integration available for it and you have inputs that you need to sum together. Now keep in mind, even though this says highs, it can be used for anything. For example, let's say there's a front mid-bass, mid-range in the door and then a front subwoofer. You could do the same thing. You can also sum those into channels 3 and 4. Let's say there was a subwoofer that was attached to and you wanted the rear speaker to have more bass. You could turn that on and that would sum that into the rear as well. Line out, it could just be your subwoofer input. For this, we're not using it. I like to label it not used and then label all of my outputs. And then I label preset 1 as the vehicle. In this case, we're working with a white F150. Click over to output view. Channel 1 and 2, we're gonna feed off of inputs front. We'll set our crossover point. Outputs rear, we will be feeding off of the rear outputs, setting the crossover point for those. And then line output, we're gonna feed off of front, and we'll set our crossovers for those. At this point, you could also set up your time delay if you already know the numbers. If you don't, that's okay. We can add those in at a later time. We just wanted to get the crossovers and the basic setup done on the amplifier. We need to do some other testing, such as polarity, balance fader, and things like that to make sure that everything is going into the right spot coming out of the Zen. One of the topics we talk about a lot on the show is polarity, the movement of the speaker. A couple questions that have come up is it that important? You know, just weird stuff. Sound is AC, does it matter? Yeah, it totally matters. You have to know the direction of the speaker. If you get that wrong, one side or the other, then they're out of phase. That causes phasing issues, which means you get cancellation. To test this at home, if you'd like to see how this actually works, take two subwoofers. Wire one the opposite of the other. So positive, positive, negative, negative, and then go negative to positive, positive to negative. Now you've wired them up backwards. What's going to happen is you'll have no bass. The same thing is true for any other driver. Where it kind of doesn't matter is whether they're all in positive polarity or all in negative polarity. Typically in the F-150, they're all going to be in negative polarity, and that has to do a lot with noise canceling and Bluetooth, meaning talking to the microphone. Sometimes if they're in polarity with the microphone, you get echo. When they're out of polarity with the microphone, you don't get echo. In this case, they should all pop red. If one pops green, then we know we have it wrong. To test this, we're using the Mobile Solutions PT98 Plus. All our speakers are moving in the right direction. In some cases, you will want these tweeters wired in the opposite direction of the mid bass. It just has to do with what type of crossovers and how they were built, the type of speaker they're using. A lot of manufacturers do actually wire their tweeters out of polarity with this to compensate for the design of their crossovers so that you don't have any dips in them. Don't assume that they're wrong. Take a closer look at the speaker and the crossover before you go and flip them. What you're looking for is if this tweeter were to pop green and that one was to pop red, that's not right. You don't want that because that's going to cause that cancellation. Now we have to do our balance and fader and make sure that all four speakers play in the holes they're supposed to. If you get this wrong, when you go to EQ it or time alignment, then you're going to run into problems because if you think you're time aligning for the driver's door and you're actually adjusting the passenger door, things could get weird really quick. The driver's rear, passenger front, driver's front. And while you're here, if you haven't done so already, make sure all of these are set to 0. You don't want these on anything because you're gonna be doing your own equalization. That's not to say you can't use them. You can, just use them sparingly. Once everything is tuned, that's the salt and pepper that is going to allow you to make certain songs better or worse. Hopefully just better. Not all music is recorded the same. Not all music has the same intensity. Sometimes you need a boost here and there in order to make something sound better. Don't be afraid to use it. However, if you find yourself turning it up a lot, well, then it's tuned wrong, or you just don't have something set up properly. What we need to do now is actually some of the more intense stuff with the car. We need to make sure all the other things work. Backup sensors, CarPlay microphones, and things like that, because those are also connected through that Zen. If those don't work, well, we could have some issues. What's the weather like today?
It's currently partly cloudy and 91 degrees.
Now when testing CarPlay, adjust the volume for CarPlay while she's talking, then that'll just adjust CarPlay's volume. When she stops talking, the volume will revert back to what it was before. So the first chime you want to check, just the standard chime. The other one is the backup sensors. Put in reverse. Fernando, could you walk behind the truck for me? If those aren't loud enough, it's a simple enough task to turn them up, in which case we wanted to turn ours up here. Grab your Windows or Mac, it really doesn't matter. And the instructions on page 7, it's gonna tell you to launch your browser. For Windows, you type in Zen. For Mac, you're gonna type in zen.local. Over here in this top corner, you have chime level, you have alert gain. Turn those two up, and that's it. You'll have adjusted the volume. If you like them quiet, well then just leave them both down. I like them a little bit louder than they were. To me, they were just a smidge too quiet. The other thing too is you'll notice that they stayed in their right speaker. If it's the rear speaker chimes. If it's the front speaker will chime. Door chime comes out of the front driver's door. Where this will be different is if you decide to use the Toshlink output. 2-channel audio only. So what it's gonna do is it's gonna sum all your warnings and chimes to left and right. You will no longer have front and rear. Each manufacturer is a little bit different when it comes to integrating into a factory factory system. This one obviously focused on the Zen. It's our preferred method right now for integrating into these F-150s with the BO system. Remember, whatever project you're working on, check those websites we showed you, find out what's available for your car, and then make sure you do all the testing so that your outcome is as pleasing as our outcome is. And with that, Fernando.
On to the next one, guys.
We hope you guys enjoyed this. Have a great night as always. We'll see you later next time.
Bye.
Bye.